But it is, as good as it is to go away sometimes, it is so good to be back home among familiar faces. And, of course, the bed you're used to is always nice. I wanted to thank Barry for teaching last week in chapter 13. We're going to continue on into chapter 14 of Luke today. So you can follow along in your Bibles if you'd like to, or I'll have the scriptures up here as well. Some of the material I've gleaned today has come from these folks here: Jim Brook, Matt Chandler, Tim Keller, C.S. Lewis, and Tim Zingle. 14:1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. So we have a situation here, if you remember a few chapters back, that Jesus really upset these folks because he was saying, the Pharisees, the rulers, the teachers of the law, he's saying, "Woe to you all," because of the things that they would do. They would distort and twist God's word. They would lay down burdens on people and wouldn't lift a finger to help them up. So they would look for a way to trap Jesus. Now, Jesus is going to dinner at this Pharisee's house. It says a ruler of the Pharisees, and they're watching him carefully. So already their intent is that, hey, we want to catch Jesus in something. And to do this, they bring in this man that has dropsy. Dropsy, it's a term that's been more, specified in our medical terminology these days. We call it edema. And basically swelling of the tissues due to fluid buildup. It can be bilateral, meaning just one side, or unilateral, both sides. It's something, if you have in your extremities, you may have seen this before, you can actually push your finger into the person's extremity and it will leave a print there for a little while. And actually that's a way they gauge how bad the edema is, by how long it takes that pitting to go away. Now if you have this in your extremities, maybe you could wear a robe or whatever it is to cover it up, but some people, you'll get this also, a retinal edema, it'll show up in your face. So really no way to hide that. Now we don't know exactly what kind of edema this person had that was brought before Jesus, but it was something that was at least apparent to Jesus. And those of you that either have some form of edema or you know somebody that does, it's very uncomfortable. So this person would have been living through life at the very least with this discomfort that's going on all the time, and possibly and probably with some other social liabilities that would come with this as well, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Because in Leviticus 3, remember this is the old law here, verses 9 through 11 says, when anyone has a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine them, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and if there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce them unclean. He is not to isolate them because they are already unclean. So this is saying that this is going to be a chronic condition. This isn't going to be something that's healed over time, and this would be something similar to the edema or the swelling that this person would experience. So this person would already be, at least ceremonially, religiously unclean. And yet the Pharisees, because of their desire to trap Jesus, are going to have contact with this unclean person, which normally wouldn't be the case, and they're going to bring him in to try to trap Jesus. And Jesus responds to them with the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, I might not be speaking to anybody here, but how many of you know who this guy is? Okay, he's famous for probably the only line he says, and he probably says more things than this. In the Star Wars movie, he says, "It's a trap," right? And listen, these guys are trying to trap Jesus, and here's the trap. They already know Jesus can heal people, right? So Jesus is going to heal, and he disregards the law, the Sabbath law, actually, that the Pharisaical system put into place that said, hey, you can't do work, and they defined work very rigidly on the Sabbath. Or he can heal, but he lacks the compassion to do so. So they're thinking this is the trap we're going to get Jesus in. But of course, the thing with Jesus and trying to trap Jesus is he's God, right? So it's not going to be an easy thing. This is going to be something that Jesus sees. So he responds to the lawyers and Pharisees saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Of course, what kind of answer can you give? Jesus brings it back on them, and if they answer this question, they're going to fall into the trap that they've laid themselves. And he goes on to say, which of you having a son, some versions will read donkey, I haven't looked into that a whole lot, a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. So again, you have the mindset and the hearts of these people that are trying to trap Jesus. Not only they're going to not provide comfort for this person who is valuable in God's eyes, as Jesus points out, but they're going to use him to further their own ends. And Jesus uses this illustration. I think it's a very pointed one. If you've got a son that falls into a pit, of course you're going to, even if it's a Sabbath, you're going to do work to rescue him, to bring him out, right? If you have a donkey or you have an ox, this is something that would symbolize your livelihood that falls into a pit on a Sabbath. You're going to work to bring him out, right? So these are things that the Pharisees would be very familiar with. Hey, of course, we value our family members. Of course, we value things that we partake our livelihood from. So they have no response to Jesus. And Jesus, in saying this, is bringing out the fact that, hey, the Sabbath is not to be used for what you're using it for. If you remember a couple chapters ago, we talked about what you can and what you can't do on the Sabbath. And instead of saying that, we're just going to stick to what God's law says, the rabbis and Pharisees felt the need, well, we're going to build hedges around God's law, so there's not even a chance of us breaking God's law. Now, we give the Pharisees a hard time, but put yourself in their place. God's been silent for 400 years. You're living under an oppressive rule from a foreign nation. And you realize as you go back and read your Old Testament that, the reason God deserts his people is because of their disobedience. So they're thinking, well, if we can be not just obedient to his law, but even more, we're going to be super obedient. We're going to build these hedges around God's law. Maybe God will come back and God will be with us once again and we'll be God's people. So that's kind of the attitude that's there, and that draws itself out into things that are very distortive of God's word. Now, this next section talks about, three basic ways we're going to break it down. Verses 7 and 11 talks about guests, okay? Jesus is addressing the guest at this banquet that he's at. And this kind of addresses an inner ring, okay? And we kind of think about these in today's terms of what group of people do I want to kind of be in with, okay? Verse 12 through 14, he addresses the host. We'll talk about this a little bit, what it means to have an open home. And verses 15 and on, he's talking to us when he talks about the feast of the poor and who's going to be there. Verse 7, now he told a parable to those who were invited. And when he noticed they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up to a higher place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So we have the situation here where Jesus is at this banquet, again, of the rule of the Pharisees, and he comes in and notices that all the guests are kind of vying for these places of honor, okay? And this has a different cultural context than it does for us today. Did I leave my water back there with you? Okay. Well, I'm sorry, my throat is just really dry today. In today's context, when we think of being seated at a place of honor, you might think of a wedding party. The bride and the groom sit kind of in the place of honor, and they have the wedding party, the groomsmen and the bridesmaid kind of sit on each side of them. But in this context, culturally, where Jesus is coming from, where you sit in relation to the guest of honor, where you sit in relation to the host, speaks a lot about your position in regard to them. So this isn't so much of, hey, I just want to sit by my best friends for this occasion. This is, hey, you can sit closer to me because I value what you can do for me. Or I want to sit close to the host because I know that he can do things for me. It's going to be kind of a quid pro quo. It's going to be, you're going to be inviting people over, and they're going to be inviting you over because you're building this social network out of which you garner work, out of which you garner recognition, out of which you garner your social status. So it's a common thing in this day and time, especially for people who are who have some means to invite people over to do this kind of thing. So they're sitting down at places of honor, but Jesus says you need to take the lowest place. And he gives this principle that's very profound here in verse 11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Listen, this wasn't a strange occurrence in Jesus' day, as I said. This is going to be something, this idea here of sitting in your proper place so you're not asked to move down, this would be something they're very familiar with because this is the social strata of their day. So it's not uncommon for them to go into a situation like this, and you have to strategically place yourself, well, I don't want to sit too close to the host because certainly I don't want to be asked to move, but I don't want to sit too far away either because people are going to see my position as not as important as I want it to be. So this is something that people would be very familiar with, but Jesus brings out this principle here, takes a common social occurrence and brings it into a more eternal principle of how we deal with God and how God deals with us. That when we exalt ourselves, we're humbled, and when we humble ourselves, we'll be exalted. And this is the idea of humility. Now, what do you think of when you think of what it means to be humble? Because what's going on here at this dinner and what happens so many times, even in our life today, though we don't think about it in this context, is we kind of jockey for position. And this definition here, jockeying for position, it's maneuvering or manipulating for one's own benefit, as in the singers are always jockeying for position on stage. This expression, dating from about 1900, originally meant maneuvering a racehorse into a better position for winning. So this example, first one that's given up here, musicians are notoriously known, especially in certain genres, to really want to be up front, okay? You want the limelight, right? If you're in a race, if you're a jockey in a race, and admittedly, I don't know a lot about this, but once you get to the straightaway, you want to kind of make sure that you're in position to really shoot out there. So when you're taking the curves, you want to kind of position yourself so that when you're going straight again, you can really motivate your horse to go. And Jesus' point here was that, we do this socially, don't we? Now, sometimes this presents itself in very subtle ways and sometimes very overt ways. Usually for guys, okay, if we're in a group of any size, especially if you're in a group of strangers, there's always going to be a couple of guys that kind of jockey towards that alpha male position, right? And of course, there'll be others that kind of straggle back, or others that's not really important. They kind of see where things kind of land before they interject themselves into the group. Now, I'm not going to say anything about women because I'm going to get in trouble here. But women, does this happen with you guys too? When you're in a group, especially with women maybe you don't know, you kind of sit back a little while and kind of see how this group is going to play out because somebody's going to kind of take the lead naturally in that group, right? And listen, that doesn't always have to be in the heart of a person jockeying for social position, but it can develop into that. Philippians 2:5 gives us a good model here. It says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. This passage in Philippians teaches us that while Christ, he had everything, he made himself nothing. Now I want you to think about this in social and socioeconomic context here. Making yourself nothing and becoming obedient. We're going to talk about this a little bit more when it comes to forming friendships later on in this chapter. A couple of things about humility. Pride is concerned with who is right, but humility is concerned with what is right. Many years ago, I used to enjoy listening and watching debates because there is something that's kind of intellectually stimulating about two ideas going head-to-head with each other. And sometimes we even get into this in the church. We like to debate each other on things. And if that's done in love, I think that's a good exercise to do. If you can find somebody that you love well enough and you know that loves you well enough where you can come together and hash those things out and leave friends at the end of the day, that's a good thing. But the attitude that's there isn't among Christians, hey, I'm right and I'm going to prove you wrong, but rather we're both on the same team and what we're seeking is the truth. And this is my idea of what this means, and this is your idea of what this means, and together let's kind of come to a place where we can find out not who is right, but what is right. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. C.S. Lewis brings this important distinction here because some of us think that humility means this thing on the left here. Think less of yourself, right? You're a loser. And listen, you probably know some people who have this mindset, right? They don't think very highly of themselves, and sometimes we're tempted to call that humility. But humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. When you think of yourself less, it leads to you serving other people more. And it's not that we're not worth anything. The sacrifice of Christ teaches you what you're worth. But it's not to dwell on ourselves. It's not to always be thinking of ourselves, but rather to be thinking about others. That's where humility stems from. So this is not in today's venue of places of honor, but it's talking about social strata. And the reason when we look at passages like this, we kind of gloss over them, is we don't think he's talking about us. We don't think he's talking to us because obviously we're all very well socially adjusted. We don't fall into these games of trying to figure out who's the alpha male. We don't fall into these games of trying to figure out who's the most dominant female in the group, right? We don't do that in our society. We're kind of well-adjusted Christian folks, so we don't think he's talking to us. Let me ask you some questions concerning this. Do you see that people have souls? The people that are around you every day, every week, how do you see them? Whether it's the waitress that's bringing you food, maybe the neighbor that's across the street, your kids' teachers, your grocery checkout person. Listen, people in the office. Do you see these people as people with souls, people that are important to God, or do you see them primarily as put here to serve you or your family? How do you approach them in relationship reveals a lot about your attitude towards them. See, the Pharisees would take social status by where you sat at dinner. And we can obviously look at that and say, that's ridiculous. That doesn't really mean anything, right? But what do? We don't take our status and our standing by where we sit in dinner in relation to another person, but we take something that's a necessity for life and we stylize it. When I was in high school, listen, you wanted the right pair of tennis shoes, right? The right pair of sneakers. So all of us when we were teenagers, at least my group did, we'd go and we'd either work or we'd beg our parents, or usually a combination of both. Hey, I want these $200 sneakers. Okay, and today they'd be more than $400. Now listen, in the 80s, you're going to spend $200 on a pair of sneakers. That's a lot of money. You're going to spend $400 on a pair of sneakers. That's a lot of money. And as adults, we can look at that and say, yeah, that's silly, right? Because as teens, we kind of do that because we want to be in the in crowd, right? Some of you who have teenagers know how this works in our mind. You think, how can you want a pair of sandals for $150? Listen, I can go down to the store over here and get, it looks like the same pair of sandals for $30, right? But it doesn't have that name on it. And as a teenager, you want that thing that has that name on it because that's going to bring you into that in crowd, right? We think we outgrow that, don't we? But what happens? As you become an adult, as you become more affluent, as you have more resources that you want to call your own, we're not drawn to the $400 pair of sneakers so much anymore, are we? We're drawn to the nicest cars that we can afford or maybe not even afford. We're drawn to the nicest house we can afford or maybe not even afford. And don't we divide ourselves like this? We divide ourselves according to what do you do for a living? How much money do you make? What type of neighborhood do you live in? What kind of car do you drive? Listen, I drive a Prius. I know people judge you according to what you drive, okay? I got a very good deal on this, and actually my previous church, we drove around a lot because we had a lot of people that lived in rural communities, and that was a good car for me. But I remember going to visit somebody, and he said, well, how do you feel about staying with the enemy? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, because he worked for an oil company. And he assumed that because of the type of car I drove that I ascribed to a certain type of mindset. Because we do that with each other. Some of us, we want to live in a gated community, maybe for safety purposes, right? But this is another way we draw distinctions with each other. Listen, it's the $400 pair of sneakers all over again, right? And I'm not discounting the fact that, listen, you can buy things and they'll make you feel good for a little while, won't it? You can get a new car, you can move into a new house, you can even remodel whatever else, and it makes you feel good for a little while. Just like when you were a teenager, when you walk into school with that new pair of shoes, it made you feel good, didn't it? But as an adult, that doesn't last. As an adult, you keep having to renew your things. You keep having to trade in. You keep having to trade up. Because ultimately, these things don't satisfy in themselves apart from God. So I want you to be honest with yourself. How often do you socialize with people of much lower socioeconomic standing than yourself? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Verse 12, he's saying, this is the open door part that I mentioned. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your neighbors or your relatives or rich neighbors. Now, this is an idiom. The same as he'll go on to say later, to hate your father, your mother, brothers, sisters. Jesus isn't here saying that you cannot invite your relatives, you cannot invite your friends. But the emphasis here is going to be on those people who cannot repay you, not the people who can repay you. Lest they invite you in return and you be repaid. Now, this was a class-stratified structure. You build alliance, you open doors by inviting people into your home, people who can add value to your network. This was the patronage system. This system works out itself in many different cultures. If you're a person of less means, you're going to try to add value to this person's network by providing them a service or a name or a deed or whether it's artwork or whatever it is that you can do to add value to their system. And because of that, they'll invite you to their home and because they get something out of it. But Jesus completely trashes the system. You invite people over and love them not because they add some value to your life. So Jesus is saying, hey, when you invite people over, don't do it because you get something out of it. Do it because you love them. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word hospitality? Yeah, eating. All right, ladies, does it look like this? Now, I got to tell you, what? I feel bad for our ladies because especially if you're one of the people that feels the pressure, when you have somebody over, everything's got to be perfect. Okay? You've got to have the plates lined up just so you... And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nice to treat your guests sometimes like that. But that's not particularly what hospitality is about. Hospitality is welcoming people into your living space, treating strangers as family, so that God can change some of them into friends. Hospitality is taken from the Greek word xenos, which means stranger. Some of you may have heard the word xenophobic, a fear of strangers, people that want to isolate themselves. So these words here, philoxenia means love of strangers. Hospitality, philoxenos, to exhibit hospitality. So one being an adjective and one being an adverb. So this is what we do. We practice hospitality, treating strangers as family so that God can change some of them into friends. And we do this by welcoming people into your living space. Because home is the place where we hopefully recharge our batteries, right? It's where you're nourished, it's where you rest, a place where you refresh yourself, where things are somewhat how you like them to be, right? You kind of get to decide what the energy, what the flow is in your home, what the living looks like in your home. You're kind of in charge of that as an adult or as a parent or as a partner in marriage. So it's a place where we find nourishment. It's a place where we can recharge. Some of you have heard this phrase, my home is my castle. Now listen, you don't have to live in a nice home for your home to be your castle, but this saying here, it's taken because you get to decide what kind of takes place in your home. And listen, I hope your home is a place where you can refresh and recharge. If your home is not a place where you can do those things, it means that something is wrong in your home system. It's something you need to take a look at. Hospitality is bringing people in and welcoming them into this living space and refreshing them and welcoming them. In the same way that you draw nourishment, maybe from food in your home, in the same way that you recharge, in the same way that you relax, you bring people into that space and you provide that for them as well. So hospitality is a love of strangers. Strangers. A couple of different groups who this entails. Other Christians. I might say, well, other Christians aren't necessarily strangers, but let me tell you, in a group this size like we have at Levy, who around you sits around you that you don't know? For on a Sunday morning, we come in for worship. For a lot of us, maybe we kind of sit by people we know. But there's going to be a lot of people here at church we don't know. So invite them. And not just the people you want to get to know. Listen, all of us that are kind of social have people on our list, right? Well, I'd sure like to get to know them better. I'd like to get to know them, but they're such a neat person. And listen, not just people on your list of people you'd like to know that would benefit you emotionally or socially in some way. But again, going back to the idea of inviting those who can't repay you, even in that way. Also, inviting your neighbors or your coworkers. Neighbors and coworkers. In talking about hospitality and love of strangers, Jesus was always eating with the wrong kind of person, wasn't he? Wasn't Jesus accused of being a drunkard and a glutton? I'm not saying he did those things, but because of the people that he hung around, right? When you hang out with drunkards and gluttons, you're probably going to be accused of the same thing. Jesus would hang out with tax collectors and prostitutes. And listen, not just for fun, but he was on a mission with them. And again, going back to this idea of stratifying ourselves or dividing ourselves socially or socially economically, how many of you know anybody that's a drunk, a prostitute? What would be the equivalent of a tax collector in our day, somebody that works for an oppressive state? We don't socialize with people like that, right? Those people aren't on our list to have over for dinner, right? I really debated with myself about whether to put this next picture up because I know it'll probably offend some people. But I want you to see the message that it's trying to bring out. Sinners and tax collectors. Are these people that you might seek out? Or do you just hang out with good, upright citizens? Who do you practice hospitality with? Now, this picture's a little darker, so we can't see a lot of detail in it. Maybe I'll post that up on my page so you can see that later. And listen, I don't really like the idea of the effeminate Jesus that has been portrayed for so long in our culture, starting way back in the Dark Ages. But looking past that, you have Jesus sitting here with people that's, maybe as good Christians, you wouldn't think of putting these people on your list, right? These are not people I'd like to get to know. Listen, I don't have any transgender people come to my house. I don't have any homosexuals come to my house. I don't have any people who struggle with alcohol or drunkenness. I don't have any people who are abusers come to my house, right? Because they're not on my list. And surely I want to invite all the people that are on my list first, right? I want to get to know those people first. I want to practice hospitality with them because you know what? They might invite me over. I get something from that. There are certain groups of people in society that you might have into your house where, looking at it at least from a very humanistic way, you're not going to get repaid for that thing. This is a very important point I want us to get. People get loved towards belief, not argued towards belief. Do you get that? People get loved towards belief, not argued towards belief. Again, this is a general statement because some people, they need that intellectual back and forth. But for most people, it's going to be what Jesus said in the Gospel of John. People are going to know you're my disciples by your love for each other, right? It's by our love for each other that people know whose we are, who we belong to. I want you to hear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying we need to discard knowledge. I'm not saying we need to discard Bible study. If you know me, you know I think those two things are very important. As a matter of fact, one of those is why I'm here at Levy. But the point that's being brought up here in hospitality is we love people because that helps bring them towards belief. I've been blessed in the last few weeks to hear a few stories that kind of speak to this, about people who have been kind of outside the church, and yet they were kind of on the fringes of the church. The church didn't drive them away, but the church loved on them. And because of that love on them, they eventually came to know Christ and fell into a saving relationship in him, or baptized into his name and obeyed the gospel. But by and large, we don't get people there by arguing them towards it. Another group of people is the poor. Now again, I talked about this a little bit more. This is not saying we can't entertain friends and neighbors, but we give preference to the poor. Because it's instinctive to invite people that you want to get to know, right? It's instinctive to invite people on your list. That list of folks, hey, some of you have them, right? You talk about them with your spouse. We need to have these people over for dinner, right? It's kind of instinctive for us to want to get to know those people because they will benefit us in some way, whether it's socially or emotionally or economically. And listen, we want some of these strangers to become friends. I'm going to read this quote here. It says, "We have a tendency to choose our own friends. Don't trust yourself. Hospitality is to practice love toward the stranger. God is actually the host in this. Some of the strangers you treat as family will become friends." And of course, you remember the story that's related in Hebrews 2, speaking about Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham entertains these three men, and they turn out to be angels, saying, hey, you can entertain angels unaware by showing practicing this hospitality towards those who are strange, those who are strangers. Another quote here, "Because God invites all sorts of people in, so should you. And God will turn some of them into friends, some people you would never have chosen otherwise." How many of you choose your friends? Nobody wants to raise their hand. No, listen, that's kind of our mindset, right? I want to choose my own friends. I want to, because I see maybe I like a characteristic about this person or this person, my goodness, they're just fun to hang out with, right? And listen, as I'm looking out to the audience today, some of you are on my list, okay? Some of you are not on my list. But listen, all of you that I've met here that I've been able to spend time with, I've really enjoyed that time. And I think that God has placed a lot of good people here. But there's always going to be some people that are not on your list. Now, this is going to take 2 or 3 screens here. This is a quote by C.S. Lewis. I want you to think about this. I'm going to go through this slow. He says, "But for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of the ceremonies has been at work. Christ said to the disciples, 'You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you.' And he can truly say to every group of Christian friends, 'You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another.' The friendship is not a reward for our discrimination and good taste in finding one another out." Listen, this is saying that as Christians, your friends that you have in your life, that's not a reward because you're good at choosing people, like high-quality people, okay? But these things are a gift from God. He goes on to say, it's the instrument by which God reveals to each other the beauties of all the others. There are no greater than the beauties of 1,000 other men. By friendship, God opens our eyes to them. They are, like all beauties, derived from him through the friendship itself, so that it is his instrument for creating as well as for revealing. At this feast, it is he who has spread the board, and it is he who has chosen the guest. It is he, we may dare to hope, who sometimes does and always should preside. Let us not reckon without our host. And what Lewis is speaking to here in a broader context is friendship, saying that there are going to be people that God brings into your life, and you become friends with them, and that gift is from God. And when you practice hospitality with somebody that you don't know, this is the process that happens. Some of those people will become your friends, and these friends that are given to you by God. Some application for this. Start inviting your neighbors, your coworkers, into your home space. And if you find God creating some unusual connection between you, invite them to church. But listen, this is important. Don't treat them as your project, but as your friend. Love them. And the reason, you invite them if you find that connection, if there's no personal connection, if there's no friendship connection, and you just say, hey, come on to church with me, but they can tell there's nothing there between you two, they've kind of turned into a project for you, right? They're no longer your friend, but they're your project. And people don't like to be projects. And listen, people can see through our intentions, and people can see that, hey, they just want to get me to church, but they don't really care about me. There's really no connection there. Oh man, this picture didn't come out quite like I wanted it to either. Sometimes on the big screen, I don't know what they're going to look like. But this on the left here says, invite somebody who is alone for dinner. It's got a picture of the dog there eating with his knife and fork. Listen, people don't want to be the dog that's invited to dinner, okay? They don't want to be your project. They want to be in a relationship where genuine love is exchanged, okay, where friendship is exchanged. And this doesn't even have to be, I'll talk to people who are younger, who are in apartments or who are in confined spaces, who maybe don't even have a place of their own yet, who might be in dorms or whatever else. Listen, for us as adults, your home space is usually in your home. But it's a place where you go to rest, recharge, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's where people know your name, where you know people, where that's a home space for you. So just because you don't have a home doesn't mean you don't have a home space to be hospitable in. So start inviting other Christians. Listen, if you have more space, invite those in who have less space. Now, this is typically going to mean if you're older, you're probably going to have more space than those who are younger. Invite them into your space. If you've been a Christian for a while, invite those who are young in their faith. Show hospitality to those who haven't been a Christian as long. If you've been at Levy longer, invite those who are new. Listen, we got a lot of new folks in here. And the practice of inviting people into our homes has kind of died down because, quite frankly, I don't know, maybe I'm cynical on this, but quite frankly, we don't like the work. We don't like the bother, right? If we're going to do anything with anybody, maybe we'll invite them out to a restaurant where we don't have to do so much work, where it doesn't have to be so much of a bother, and where we can say if things aren't going well, I got to get home, right? Because listen, it's uncomfortable to kick people out of your house, right? When you're done with them, it's 3 o'clock, you really should be leaving right now, which is why I'm glad we have an elders meeting every Sunday at 3, so I can say that. No, that usually doesn't happen. But if you've been at Levy for a while longer, invite those who are new. Oh, let's see. We've got about 10 minutes here. Going to verse 15. When one of those who had reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I have to go examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who are invited shall taste my banquet.'" This little section here starts off in verse 15 where a person says to Jesus, he says, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." What's Jesus just been talking about? At this time, again, if you know your history here, Jerusalem in particular being held by Roman power. And Antiochus comes in here. He cleanses the temple. He does all these horrible things. And so some people in their mind, and you see this in the apostles a lot, they're thinking the kingdom of God is going to be a physical established kingdom, okay? There's not a whole lot of eschatological thought about the kingdom of God being a spiritual kingdom at this point. So Jesus goes on and not corrects this man, because remember, these things are to be held in secret. Jesus talks with him about who will be there, though, at that kingdom. So I believe he's talking for our benefit here. But he said to him, "A man," and the story of the man is God, "once gave a great banquet and invited many." Now, who are these many people that were invited? I'm going to contend the people who were invited are happy, well-off, and accomplished, because we're going to look at their excuses. But at the time for the banquet, he sent a servant to say to those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is ready." And what happens? Well, one person, he bought a field. One person bought 5 yoke of oxen. One person just married a wife. Listen, these are people that are happy. These are people that have some position, because, listen, a poor person can't go and buy a field, right? Poor person's not going to go out and buy 5 yoke of oxen. Poor person might get married. But this, again, is an excuse of why they can't come to this banquet. So when it came time to come, they all made excuses. They all had this busy work to do, right? And you think, hey, well, this isn't a bad thing. If you buy a field, of course you want to go check it out. If you buy these oxen, of course you want to make sure that they can work before you really accept them as your own. So they had these things to do. And listen, if you get married, you want to spend some time probably with your wife. I'm going to do some application here. I was about 7, 8 years old when my parents became Christians. We lived in Korea, and I remember their lifestyle very abruptly changed. We used to all go down to these beer parties on the river, and kind of as little kids, we kind of fend for ourselves, and sometimes get into a lot of trouble and whatever else it is. And I remember that kind of stuff stopped really suddenly. And as a little kid, I didn't really understand exactly why that was. Of course, when I become older, I come to find out, well, that's part of what this thing means to become a Christian is part of your lifestyle will change. Right? And so we become Christians. We see that we need to get rid of certain things in our life, and we need to start practicing other things in our life. And these are some things that we practice, right? We memorize Scripture, we serve in church, we help the poor, and these are good things. But Jesus asked for more. He asked for your heart. And that's the bad, I say the bad, that is the hard thing about Jesus. Because he doesn't just say, do this and do that, but he asks for your heart. He wants you to be pointed towards him, not just in your actions, but in your being, in who you are. And Danny's been doing a great job about talking about this idea in the discipleship series that he's been going through this year. Now listen to this quote. It says, "And so what we do is busy ourselves with religious rite and moral action in an attempt to run from God, penetrating the heart. And this is why you get a weak, retarded version of Christianity, because you've got people who are all busy doing things, but they don't have a heart transformed." If you go to the gym at all, you have machines you can work out with. Now, what would happen if you just decided one day, I'm just going to work out the right side of my body? Now, I'm just going to lift with my right arm. I'm just going to do squats with my right leg. What would happen? You might think, well, at least you've got one side of your body that's going to be really strong, right? But the body's not made that way. If you get a really muscular side of your body, what's going to happen is it's going to start to pull your hips out of place, right? It's going to start to pull one shoulder forward and push one shoulder back because our bodies aren't built to handle that sort of thing. And that's just like the body of the church. When we concentrate too much and say, well, we're going to be all about this one thing or that other thing over here without giving Christ our hearts, we wind up being this kind of malformed person who's not really capable of doing anything because we haven't exercised the whole being. We don't have a heart that's transformed. He goes on to say, so you don't have worship, you don't have joy, you just have things to do. And if you do them well, then you get to look at other people who aren't doing those things well and feel superior. All the while, Jesus goes after the heart. Isn't it funny how you can use religion to run from him? Now, maybe this is a bleak or cynical picture this author is posting here, but I think in many cases it's true. We devote ourselves to doing things, and listen, not bad things, good things, but we neglect to give Jesus the heart. Jesus says, hey, I want every part of you. I want what you treasure. I want what you think about. I want what you value. Those sins in your life, I want to take care of those too. But so many times we just say, well, you know what, this part of my life over here, God, I'm going to hang on to that, but I'll do all these other things. I'll memorize Scripture, I'll teach a class, I'll go work, whatever else it is with the kids. But Jesus says, no, I want your heart. I want your being. And so we can actually use our religion to run from him. We can hide ourselves in religious activity without giving Jesus our heart. God presses on your heart. God presses on your heart that what was in your heart is wicked. Where did we often run to? Church. And we get super busy in all these things, Christian activities, but they don't bring life. So pray that Jesus won't let your heart alone. That's the thing about the Holy Spirit. Once you let him in, you're in for a whole lot of trouble. That's where healing and transformation take place. In the moment where God reveals how wicked your heart really is, you're so close to the banquet table. That's what it means to be poor in spirit. Really is realizing that myself and yourself in ourselves, we have wicked hearts, don't we? We have wicked hearts. But instead of being poor in spirit so many times, we don't recognize this fact. In this story, God, the host of this party, doesn't invite them. He says, bring them in. Don't just invite them, bring them in here. Go out and get them. They couldn't have accepted an invitation. Why? Because they could not reciprocate. This was the patronage system. In this day and age, you know that you couldn't go to a party like that if you were invited because there's no way you could repay your host. There's no way you could repay him. Jesus is saying that there's nothing in this world that will ever fulfill the idea of home, where all of your hurts are healed, where all of your hunger is totally sated, and that only the poor in spirit get into this banquet. But some of us want to be not poor in spirit, but middle class in spirit, right? I'll be good, and I'll help God save me. I'll do 90% of the work, God will do 10, or vice versa. I'll do 1% of the work, and God does the other 99, right? Have you heard that? That falls into the mindset we talked about a few weeks ago during service of being a boarder. You have a deal with God. You help him out. Versus being poor in spirit when you realize, hey, my heart is wicked, and even my best deeds, even my best actions don't put God in debt to me, but rather what God gives is a free gift. One thing I want to think about some more here, but I wanted to put it up here anyway, was middle-class people tend to be middle-class in spirit, and poor people tend to be poor in spirit, because when you're poor, you failed. Typically, you know what it's like to fail. You know what it's like to have nothing. You know what it's like to be totally dependent. I'm not saying that's a place that we should stay, okay? But it's a mindset that we need to be able to recognize. And once we get up to be middle class, once we're doing a little bit better, what happens? We don't want to be dependent. We don't want to have others do for us. We want to help Jesus out. We want to help God out. We want to be the good person because then God owes us certain things. So how could God give this banquet for free? Because hospitality is expensive. Listen, hospitality costs something. You have people into your house, as we mentioned a moment ago. It's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you some emotional energy, right? But Jesus came in here not as an oxen owner, a field buyer, but as a homeless person born in a manger. It's the only way we could be brought to God's table is that if Jesus was thrown out so that you could be brought in. So bringing you to the table, that's what it costs God. What are you going to do to bring people to your table, to bring people to your home space, to show that hospitality, that love of the stranger, not the person on your list, but the person you serve, not the project, but the person you want to make your friend? You know, we've got just a few more verses in chapter 14 that we'll try to cover at the beginning of next week's class, but I think we're out of time for now. Love you guys.